So my interest is in organisational dynamics. Much of my research to date has been situated within the field of faith-based development, humanitarianism and advocacy. In recent years, many and varied questions have been discussed regarding organisations operating within this field, including how should they be defined and categorised, in what ways are they distinct from organisations that don't have a faith basis, do they have comparative advantages over other organisations. The focus of my own work has been on understanding what the faith orientation of such organisations means in their actual day-to-day practice. What does it mean for an organisation, as opposed to just the individuals within it, to have a religious or faith identity? The argument underlying the approach I take to exploring questions such as these is that in order to explore how faith influences organisational practice, one needs to take a broader perspective that focuses not only on faith, but also on other influencing factors, such as those connected to organisational systems and processes, for example, and the ways in which dynamics related to faith interact with these other dynamics, particularly where there are points of conflict or tension. Arguably at the heart of these points of tension is the fact that the organisation through which religious ideals and beliefs are put into practice is not neutral or valueless, even though it's often assumed to be such. I'm now going to introduce this approach and show how it can be used in practice. Various typologies have been constructed over the years to help define faith-based organisations and describe and understand their practice. I imported a perspective from institutional theory, called the institutional logics perspective, and used a typology produced by the institutional theorists who developed this perspective to construct an analytical tool to study faith-based organisations within my field of interest. It's a tool that I believe can enable theological reflection and that can also be adapted to study other faith-based organisations. The term faith-based organisation encompasses any form of faith-based organised activity and therefore also churches. The emergence of institutional logics as a distinct concept came about through a chapter written by Roger Friedland and Robert Alford in 1991, in which they argued that organisational and institutional theory needs to pay proper attention to the societal context in which individual and organisational behaviour occurs. They believed that an understanding of context is essential to any understanding of such behaviour, something that was lacking at the time. The institutional logics perspective really came into its own from around 2012, so it's a relatively recent theoretical approach, but the number of studies drawing on it is rapidly increasing. According to the perspective, multiple institutional orders exist within society, such as the state, professions, market and community. Society is seen as an inter-institutional system, and the institutions of which it is comprised as both patterns of activity at a supra-organisational level that shape human behaviour, and symbolic systems that enable individuals and organisations to order and give meaning to this behaviour. The two key points to note here are that institutions have both material and symbolic components, and that there's a connection between higher level institutional orders and organisational and individual action. At the core of each institution is a logic that steers aspects such as its goals and priorities. To give an example, taking the market as an institution, its goal is to generate capital, whereas one could argue that the goal of community as an institution is to pursue the common good. In other words, institutional logics steer the organising principles of these institutions, and they provide societal actors with a sense of identity, as well as motivations and justifications for their values and practices. For example, I was having a conversation with someone recently who had moved from a communications role in the civil service to a communications role in a private sector firm. And they were talking about the difference between the two environments in terms of pace because of the drive for efficiency within the latter. This drive for efficiency has its roots in the logic of market, and its dominance within the firm meant that the person was having to deliver work at a pace they weren't accustomed to within the civil service, where the market logic was present and in action, but not the dominant logic shaping action. But this person also said that there was a demand for excellence within the firm, so that at the same time as they were having to deliver at pace, they were having to deliver work that was considered high quality within the firm. And what was particularly interesting to me about these comments, based on my own experience within similar firms, is how the drive for efficiency shapes perceptions of excellence. By way of comparison with academia in this regard, I carried out some work for a firm recently that involved qualitative and quantitative research. I collected and analysed a great deal of data, but all the firm wanted from the data was a set of PowerPoint slides because of their drive for efficiency. And those slides had to be presented in a certain way, according to the firm's standard of excellence. They didn't want the 20-page report that I'd written, which was where my focus was in terms of excellence. As I said, there's a drive for efficiency within the firm stemming from the dominance of the market logic, whereas having been shaped by an academic environment predominantly, I was driven by a desire to demonstrate the quality of my craft, which stems from the dominance of the professional logic. So in reality, different logics are always in play within organisations, shaping one another and at times coming into conflict, particularly where one logic is prioritised over another. So how can the institutional logics perspective be used in practice? Building on Friedland and Alford's pioneering work, Patricia Thornton, William Acasio and Michael Lounsbury developed a method by which institutional logics can be analysed socio-scientifically, producing a topology of the logics of what they perceive to be the 7 institutional orders that comprise the interinstitutional system, that is society, identified as family, community, religion, state, market, profession and corporation. The approach I took to exploring the practice of faith-based organisations is rooted in their work. I started by unpacking dynamics at the societal level using their topology, which I'll say more about in a moment. This societal level research had a historical focus because I wanted to gain insight into some of the historical dynamics related to the logics impacting the practice of aid, to set the research within a broader societal and historical context in preparation for empirically examining dynamics at the field level. The empirical research was carried out in 2 stages. The first stage was to construct a topology at the field level, developed on the basis of Thornton et al. Societal level topology. This topology would become the tool that I would use to analyse data collected within one organisation in the field. The field in which development, humanitarian and advocacy organisations operate is broad and encompasses a wide range of organisations. So for the topology to be useful, a smaller subcomponent of that broader field needed to be identified. So I ended up using the Disasters Emergency Committee member organisations. The DEC is a UK-based group of organisations that enables members to fundraise jointly during humanitarian crises. It consisted of 14 member organisations when I was carrying out this research. And it was a fitting group of organisations for the empirical research because the DEC organisations are all influential actors within the sector with high status. The larger organisations within the sector were of interest to me on account of this status because they play a significant role in shaping practice within the sector and conceptions of legitimacy and so forth. 3 of the DEC member organisations are among the top 10 largest in the UK-based sector in terms of annual income. So this is the topology of logics developed through the research. It's a field-level tool and it's based on ideal types, which I'll come to in a moment. Thornton et al. Conceptualised the institutional logics perspective as a matrix, placing the institutional orders along the x-axes. Along the y-axes, they place the elemental categories or building blocks. These represent the symbols and practices connected to each order, such as sources of authority, legitimacy, and so forth. Put differently, for each institutional order, the content of these y-axis categories represents their logic. Importantly, the y-axis categories are not definitive and can be expanded upon or amended depending on context. But specifying categories according to which institutional logics can be seen in action enables us to analyse how they impact practice. I chose to focus on 4 institutional orders, and these were the ones that I found to be the most prevalent within organisational practice: corporation, market, religion and community. In order to build the field-level topology of logics, I began with the existing theory and literature, focused on the societal level, and I explored their application within my specific field of interest. The question underlying the development of each logic was, what would one expect an organisation within the field's practice to be if it was influenced only by the logic of corporation, market or religion, for example? Put differently, what are the sets of expectations within the field connected to each of these logics? Additionally, the development of the topology was steered by the historical survey already mentioned, some initial interviews conducted in DEC member organisations, and several sets of documents. So the topology was